Judy Dow has put in countless hours over the last year to help our climate action plan be all that it can be. She has been the leading forest advocate in the climate action plan process here in Vermont. And we all owe her a huge debt of gratitude. And it really goes beyond that, because I would say that Judy Dow has brought really the much needed moral compass to the climate action plan process, a dose of ethics and a reminder about issues related to equity at all times. And so we're just incredibly grateful for her leadership in the climate action plan process here at Standing Trees. And, just honored to call her a friend and colleague, and thrilled to be able to bring her to our community tonight. And before I turn it over to her, I just wanted to share a few quick updates with you all since the last time that we all gathered for an event. And first off, I wanted to thank you for your incredible advocacy over the first half of the Vermont legislative session. I'm hoping that many of you are aware of some of these victories, interim victories, but victories nonetheless that we've had along the way. If you have not heard, the bill that Standing Trees had a huge part in putting together and has been lobbying for from the beginning, which is H606. It's the bill championed by Representative Sheldon, chair of the House Natural Resources Committee, that would establish a goal of protecting 30% of Vermont by 2030 and 50% by 2050, including putting 10% of Vermont's forests into wildlands. We have just 3% in wild forests today. That bill has passed through the House of Representatives and is on its way to the Senate. And that would not have happened without your advocacy, without all of you raising your voices. And the same thing is true for another bill that is trying to improve management of private forests here in Vermont, creating the opportunity in our use value appraisal program in Vermont to put more of our forests on a path to old forests. And that's Bill H697. This bill also really puts current use into a much better paradigm than it's been in up until now. It's not a perfect bill, but we're still thrilled that that too has passed the House and is moving forward. And we hope that you'll help us see that one through the Senate too in the weeks ahead. So those are two bills, H606 and H697, to be watching in Vermont. And keep your eye out for opportunities there to keep moving those along. Just a couple other quick updates. You've also taken action to protect Lake Tarleton in New Hampshire's White Mountain National Forest, a spectacular landscape that us taxpayers paid to acquire 20 years ago and add to the National Forest System. And at the time, this amazing lake, which is, we've discovered, a very important stop along a very old trail that the Abenaki used for millennia, crossing back and forth through the White Mountains. This forest is targeted for 900 acres of logging in the watershed immediately surrounding Lake Tarleton. And because of your advocacy, we've gotten the Forest Service to delay implementation. They're going to reissue an assessment of the project, and there's going to be an opportunity to comment coming up very soon. We expect this April. So again, keep your eye out for opportunities to weigh in on this really important project on the White Mountain National Forest. Over on the Green Mountain National Forest, the Telephone Gap project that you've probably seen in the news is also expected to move forward this spring. This project would lead to 11,000 acres of logging in one of the largest and wildest forests in the state of Vermont, in the central Green Mountains. And this is another huge opportunity for us to raise our voices together and put this forest on a different path. So this summer, in addition to commenting, we also want to get you out into these special wild places. And so we're going to have the chance to get together face to face for a change. And so keep your eye out as well for a schedule of outings. And we're working on that right now, putting together hikes into Lake Tarleton's beautiful watershed, into the mountains around Telephone Gap, into the Worcester Range here in north central Vermont, near where I live in Montpelier, a very favorite place of mine, which the state of Vermont is going to be looking at to revise the management plan for as well in the near future. So in all of these special places and more, be on the lookout. And we want you to guide a hike. If there's a special place to you that you want to share with your fellow Standing Trees community, in whatever state you might live in around New England, please get in touch, because we'd love to have you sign up to lead one this summer and help to build this wild forest community around the region. Go to our website, you'll find some great petitions to sign, and stay in touch with us as these action opportunities come up. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Judy Dow, who's the Executive Director of Gedakina. She again has been a champion for forests throughout the Climate Action Plan process. And we are just so lucky to have her here tonight. And Judy, I'm going to hand it over to you, and please, Judy, add in additional notes from your bio if you'd like before you get going, but otherwise I want to just give you the floor so you've got the maximum amount of time possible. So honored to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. It's so nice to see many faces, and almost didn't turn on my picture after all those nice words you gave me. Thank you for that. So I would like to share, and I'm trying to figure that out. Share screen, share PowerPoint. Can you see this?
Yes.
We can, yeah.
Thank you. So I want to start off a little bit about talking about this two-row wampum bead. It's about two like minds walking together, and the white beads stand for place. And so these two minds walking on the same path is what gets things accomplished. And I was commissioned to make this for the clan mothers at Ganawage for a guy called Neil Young, and some of you older folks might remember Neil Young from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and he was helping the reservations prevent the tar sands from coming through their reservations. And so I just thought that it would be a good place to start tonight, because we're talking about place, and we're also talking about a bunch of minds walking together in one direction. And I want to start with going through the Narrows. This is, native stories are usually told in metaphors. If you don't understand a metaphor, you probably won't understand a native story. But this is the metaphor of going through the Narrows. When I was a child, I lived in the island in South Arrow, and I had a little sunflower, and I would travel around in the bay and then go through the Narrows into the open lake. And every time I got into the Narrows, I knew I had to make a decision. Did I turn around or did I go back? Was I okay to handle the rough water, or did I want to go back to the calm water? So the Narrows change. They're all over. They're in cliffs, they're in mountains, and they're along the water. But there's usually an indication within the Narrows by the currents or by the air that things are changing. And coming from the largest family targeted by the Vermont Eugenics Survey, my father always used to say to me, I can't believe people pay you to talk. I would pay you to shut up. And he would say that because he was concerned for me. And so what Zach calls bravery at these meetings is just me contradicting my father, as any child would do, right? So I want to talk about the going through the Narrows. We live in this world that is filled with animals and birds and fish and flowers and trees and all these wonderful things that we grew up. And because of the roughness in the Narrows, we have COVID, we have war, we have climate crisis. Because of all those things we're facing in the Narrows, we're either going to make it to the other side or we're not going to make it anywhere. The Narrows are going to be rough. They're going to be rough. We're in them now. We can see that they're rough. And we can see that when we get to the other side, it will be like no place we ever knew. There won't be any systems working that we know and use regularly. Our roads will be damaged. Our power will be down. Our systems of telephone and communication will all be broken. That traveling through the Narrows is going to take us to a new and unfamiliar world. And it already, you can see that many places in this world where storms have been covered the islands with water and broken everything, or war has devastated everything. You can already see that happening. So I have 2 beautiful grandchildren that live next door to me. And every time I give a presentation on something like this, they're always like, Mimi, but you got to talk about hope. There's got to be hope. And that's been really a difficult part for me to do, to talk about hope. Because when you're in the Narrows, it's tough. There's a lot of difficult things going on. You have to think every day which way you want to go. And if you're going to help somebody. Because in the Narrows, some people just simply breeze through. Some will struggle. Some will help to pick up those who struggle. And some will not make it. They will die on the journey. So let's talk about how this connects with the land. The settler's perspective of the land is ownership or economy or both. Indigenous people know that they are the land. When you pull on something in nature, the rest of the world is connected, and that impacts us. They know that. And so when you look at this place, you see one perspective seeing the land as whose land it is. This is my land. This is our land. This is her land. Not a place that belongs to everybody that we need to take care of, and that there's no ownership. And so there's 5 tools or 5 values in life that I often teach children and that I learned as a child myself. Relationships, responsibilities, reverence, respect, and reciprocity. And those 5 tools are what I've tried to portray in the Ag and Ecosystems Committee meeting. I've tried to get them to see that economy cannot be first. It just can't happen if we're going to succeed and make it through the Narrows. So understanding place gives you a deeper root. It gives you mental and social and physical awareness and health by understanding the place and the common pot specifically. So the common pot is a title of a book that Lisa Burks wrote, and it describes the intervales along our waterways. And those intervales that flood all the time are the special places. They're the places where the new nutrients come and flood, and the places where we've always hunted. It's the places where the animals come for their food, so we consequently hunt those there. And these low flat places are connected with our history. They're connected with who we are. This is my son and my grandson. And to help us along with those 5 tools, we have the 7 directions. And most people think that there's 4 directions, right? But for us, there's 7. There's the four cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And there's up, and there's down, and there's the direction you in life is traveling. And the reason it's so important to understand those directions is because we have to move through the narrows. We have to move through our world like a school of fish or like a flock of starlings. We have to move. And the reason they move together so gracefully is because they're fully aware of the 7 directions around them. They know the direction they're going, whether they're flying away from an enemy or swimming away from an enemy. They know what the person next to them is doing, and they're fully aware of the 7 generations. In this picture on the right, if you look closely, you can see it's shaped like a foot, if you can see that. And I put that in there because it shows you how the land tells our stories. Many times we are told that our stories are myth, or they're cute, or they're quaint, but there are documented events that tell the story of what happened. And this comes from a paleo story about Winooski and the moose. And this is the jumping off point. This is where his story starts. And consequently, his footprint is there. And you can go through and read the land and come up with all of these stories. And in order to hang on to this land, we need to reclaim the old songs, the stories, the prayers, and all of those things that will help us to move forward. We've been working in our gardens at Gedakina, reclaiming traditional ecological knowledge and how to grow and how to control pests, and all these old ways that we've been reclaiming. And we've been able to feed many, many people with all reusing that old traditional ecological knowledge. So this picture on the right was taken a few years back at the first Indigenous March in Washington, D.C., the one where the older Native man was trying to get a younger man to stop yelling and screaming and all the other little things that were happening during then. It was right next to where this woman was. And she was raising this sign trying to get the young man to stop. And this is a chart I put together to help the commission understand the way I look at the land and the tools I came to this meeting with, or the meetings for the last year. It's really difficult for them because their first their first perspective is money. And that's not where I'm coming from at all. So the little circle on the bottom, a key, it stands for soil, and soil is the birthing place of all things from microorganisms to humans. And it's a birthing place that we understand and know we need to protect. The next circle out is the community, or the spine of the land. It's those same things, microorganisms to humans, and they're all connected, and they all work to protect the soil and to protect the next circle, which is the watershed in which they live, the band's land. And so they understand if they don't protect the headwaters of that watershed where they all live, the spine of the land will be in danger, and so will a key, the soil. And then the next concentric circle out is the nation's land. It's the place where everybody speaks the same language and understands. Gedakina is the last one. It's our worldview, our world and our worldview, and how it relates to other people's worldview, which is the struggle I've had at these committee meetings, because my worldview has been the only one at the meetings, and they've not wanted to listen. They've done over and over again what I learned as a child. My first language was French, and the first thing I learned was when I started kindergarten: if I smile, and shake my head yes, no matter if I understood them or not, everything was okay. And that's what was happening to me, as if I didn't understand what they're doing. They smiled and shook their head, yes, but didn't pay any attention or little attention until I repeated it over and over and over. So passing through the Narrows is going to be difficult. You can see it's increasingly problematic around the world. We have to look at this as a global issue. We cannot look at it as our issue, our Vermont issue. It's not our Vermont issue. So for instance, one of the things that they want to do is to increase the use of electric cars. And so and they said that's such a clean energy. And so when I asked a question, I was totally confused by that. And I'm like, where's the equity in that? How is that fair and just? And they said, well, we know it's not affordable for everybody now, but it will be. The price will go down the more people buy it. And I said, no, that's not the issue for me. Where are we getting the electricity from? And they said, well, Hydro-Quebec, of course. And I said, we need to look at this holistically. We need to look at this globally. If they take more electricity from Hydro-Quebec, they're going to expand. So they've already relocated 11 nations, 11 native nations, and over 1 million acres of land was covered with water. So we lost the biodiversity that we needed to store carbon in the ground. So now that Biden has come out with, we need electric cars by such and such a date, they're talking expansion to make our needs. And they're expanding into Newfoundland and other places and talking about relocating 5 more Indigenous nations. So why is this important? 80% of the world's biodiversity is in the hands of 5% of Indigenous people in this world. And one way to get out of this carbon mess is to sequester carbon by biodiversity and trees, right? And so when I questioned that, they once again did not have an answer, and once again insisted it was clean energy, smiled and shook their heads. So now, if we're to make it through the Narrows, we have to know the difference between a want and a need. So they're telling us now solar and wind and solar, wind, and what's the other one? Solar, wind, and hydropower is the answer to everything. It's clean energy, and that it will solve the problems. It doesn't solve the problems because nobody knows the difference between what they want and what they need. And so the increase of what people want will continue to increase, causing more and more increase in all of those things that they supposedly believe will fix the problem. Personally, I think they could probably fix the problem if people just reduced and understood the difference between a want and a need. But in that 370 some odd paper they wrote, they didn't put that in there anywhere. Because we're raising generation after generation that want, and they really don't need it. So we have to decolonize. We have to come together in one mind and one heart if we are to survive. And this is a paper one of my students made, and he was learning the trees. And in the process of learning the trees, he began to write the language down on the trees that had to do with decolonization. And so this was just something I wanted to share with you because there are so many ways you can teach children about understanding what a want is, what a need is, and how to decolonize their thinking and get their thinking out of their pocketbook or their wallet and put it into being one with the land. It's going to be difficult to get through. The old ways that have been lost are going to have to be reclaimed. Here I'm working with an Athabascan woman, and we're making salmon skin lanterns. And those old ways are there. The things we need to survive are there. We have to find balance in everything we do. And that's not easy. That's hard. People don't always want balance. They want the easy way. And the easy way is not necessarily the right way. So where does this leave us? I was trying to make a list, and then it kind of started to fill a bunch of pages. So I tried to narrow it down. We need to know different ways of knowing. We have to understand there are different ways of knowing, and we have to braid those knowledges together. If we don't braid them together, if we don't acknowledge them and braid them together, we're always going to be buttoned heads, always. There's going to be indigenous ecological knowledge here, and there's going to be Western science here. In one of the last meetings I listened to, one of the council members said, well, we're only going to consider Western science. So already his mind was made up that there was not going to be anything holistic involved in how we were going to solve the problem. Decision making will be difficult. It is difficult, and it has been difficult. It's not equal. We've been pushed into a consensus by dissent model. So consensus as I was raised in was everybody had to agree. And if you didn't agree, we just kept talking it out until somebody, the last holdout, agreed. If that person didn't agree, that person would say that they agreed to disagree for the betterment of the group. But what happens here is if people disagree, the dissent model is, okay, most of us agree, so we're moving forward. Modern technologies are questionable. In some cases, they're just unjust. Technical tools, solutions have not been properly vetted. Matter of fact, they're talking about putting the biomass committee on hold for a year until they have new tools in place. And the new tools they want are problematic because the new tools do this life cycle analysis in which they compare all of these horrific things that we already know are bad, like fossil fuels and coal, with something like biomass, and they'll say, oh, look how good it is because it's so much better than fossil fuels and coal, so we might as well rely on biomass. When we rely on biomass, we lose our trees. There is no net zero there. There's no equity there. We need to reduce. We need to spend time on learning the difference between a want and a need. People are wedded to their silos of learning. There has been a complete lack of holistic learning in these meetings. They have only been interested in the silo they've been trained in. If they're a forester, they're only interested in what they learned in forestry in college. Too many agency people. So what happens with all these agency people is it forms one perspective. The balance of power and privilege is completely flawed on these subcommittees, the council and the council itself. And worse yet, they know it. They know it's been out of balance. The process has been skewed by the control agency people have. So agency people may have a totally different opinion, but they can't say that because their boss is telling them what to say. It sometimes feels like I'm talking to the wind. because I have a different perspective, they give me the old yes and smile. And sometimes the wind hears it and tosses it right back into them in another form. The Ag and Ecosystem Committee has been the only committee with a different perspective, but others still control the outcome because there's a hierarchy in these subcommittees. It goes to the council, and the council then controls what happens. So Annette gave me this picture, and I thought this would be a good thing to end with. It kind of describes what's happening with the council. They have this carbon tunnel vision where they're only interested in carbon emissions. They're not interested in air pollutants or overconsumption or water crisis or health or any of those things. And that's why it's not a concern to them when you talk about something being inequitable. It's not a concern because carbon emissions is the one and only thing that they're interested in. And so I have so how do we get past this? So for me, equity is the key. And I use these 4 sustainable questions when I'm working with students. Does the practice support reducing energy use? Does the practice contribute to lessen man-made waste? And is it somehow helpful to the environment? And is there fairness to all living things, human and non-human? Now, I do want to thank the council because I pushed really hard for these 4 sustainable questions to be included in the principal agreements that we follow. And they did put in fairness to all living things when I pointed out to them that was soil and water. And once I pointed out that was soil and water, they did add it. And it's there, but most of the other things are not a part of it, but they're very important to me. And I think that's the way we have to go down the road. We have to look at practices and support them if they're reducing energy or contributing to lessen the man-made waste and somehow helpful to the environment. Now, I use this with 3rd and 4th and 5th grade children. So I would think the people on these committees could understand this. And I think that's it. Yes. So I don't know how the question process will work, but I'm sure I've ran my mouth enough and you got the idea of what the committee meetings look like. And so go ahead and ask questions.
Well, that was terrific. Thank you, Judy. And what we're going to do is open up the chat. And if you would prefer to type a question to the chat, you can ask your question that way and we'll relay it to the group. But you're also welcome to turn on your video and raise your hand and unmute yourself when called on. And so please feel free to do that as well. If you've never used the hand raising function in Zoom before, you can find it on the bottom of your screen. You'll see a button that says reactions that has a little plus symbol next to a smiley face. If you click on that button, you'll see an option to raise your hand. So that's how to raise your hand. Otherwise, like I said, please feel free to put the question into the chat, and Cheryl Joy or myself or one of the other co-hosts tonight on the back end will make sure that we ask the question of Judy. And just to maybe get things rolling, Judy, I was hoping, would you mind sharing with us all where is the conversation right now? The question about the future of biomass electricity is maybe the biggest lingering question that the Climate Action Plan has kind of ahead, and that's because of your really incredible advocacy. And I was wondering if you could just fill us in on the task group that you're a part of, and maybe share just a little bit about how people in the audience here tonight might be able to raise their voice or be a part, of those conversations in the future to support your work.
Well, I think Annette just put the link in the chat, but there will be an Ag and Ecosystems meeting tomorrow. And we had a list of recommendations concerning biomass that we forwarded to the council. And it wasn't so much that we disagreed with them, it was that we didn't have time to learn more and figure out things. And there have been several counselors who are trying to get the biomass committee closed down, and because they want to wait till the tools are created. And so I've been having discussion with folks, and what they're going to do is they're going to talk to the Ag and Ecosystems people tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow's Friday. Yeah, about how they feel about their recommendations and what they want to see to happen. And at that meeting, it will decide the future of whether the biomass committee continues the way it is, what the scope of work will be, and how we will proceed.
Okay.
Well, Judy, we have a question. What are your thoughts on equity decrease, equitably, on how to equitably decrease the environmental footprint of individuals to decrease global impacts?
Well, equity is a difficult thing, right? We have people living, they're pushed to the margins, they're forced to the margins of town. And not that they necessarily want to be there, but they're there. And they live in those margins of town. They live in small apartments. So there's very little air circulation there. They have no trees most of the time. The summer it's hot. It's a rented apartment and they can't get AC or fans, whatever. And they have a long ways to walk to the bus, a long ways to walk to the store. And there needs to be equity there. We need to be able to not, we can have geographical margins, but we shouldn't have people margins of town. We should have equity in those places for those people, and it should be equitable to hear their voices. So for instance, in Burlington in the 70s, they put all the wastewater treatment facilities next to the poor housing, so because their voices could never be heard over the cry of the others who were saying, not in my backyard. And so they have to start listening to those voices in order for there to be some equity. And I think if they do that, start making things equitable and balanced, then we can have a better carbon footprint in those areas.
Okay, another question from the chat is, are there specific recommendations in the climate action plan regarding reducing energy or consumption needs, as you mentioned, in terms of core values and sustainability?
Well, I can't honestly say that I studied those 300 and some odd pages. I read them, but I didn't really study them. So I can't speak for the other committees, but it was something that I found distressing on our committee, that there wasn't a lot of discussion about reducing. And I don't know, you guys were there every week. I can't recall anything specific about reducing.
I don't think I recall that either. And in other of the subcommittees as well. So do you remember, Zach, anything like that?
I think that's a great comment. Yeah, I don't, from the Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee, I think, yeah, the topic of reducing consumption was rarely mentioned, if ever. Yeah.
I think so too. And that's where that whole want and need issue for me is problematic, because if you always get what you want and not what you need, then you're never going to reduce. You're always going to need more and more power.
There's another, just to keep going here with there's some great questions showing up in the chat. Then the next one here is from Hannah. She asks, how do we move forward collectively without appropriating unjustly, without unjustly taking ownership of native land use practices and cultures? So let me say that again. How do we move forward collectively without unjustly appropriating or taking ownership of native land use practices and cultures? What do you want to see from people of colonial descent?
Well, some of it's common sense. I mean, what we do to the land, we do to ourselves. That is our traditional beliefs, but it's also common sense. If you're going to dump from 4 o'clock in the evening till 8 in the morning, leachate high in arsenic, lead, and carcinogens into the river, you're not going to have clean water. So there are laws that we have on the books now, and people need to start talking about the violations they see. They need to start reporting them, and the state needs to enforce them. The state is not big on enforcing. They're bigger on, let me help you come into compliance, than they are on enforcing. So it can take years to enforce something.
I wonder if she might also be talking about Hydro-Quebec and what's going on up there.
Oh, okay.
Of course,
well, with Hydro-Quebec, of course, when was the last time they grew? The 80s, maybe. That there was lots of protests going on down here, and lots of French Indian and French people from down here going up there to help with the protests. But it didn't do any good. The only thing that's going to do any good is to reduce consumption, because the Prime Minister has made it clearly visible, and he's said it orally, if they want power, we will give it to them, because it's going to be more money for us. So they're going to do it. So we have to make that need go away by reducing.
And just on that one topic, I know that there are activists here in the U.S. trying to be allies, to the communities up there. There's an organization called North American Megadam Resistance Alliance. I think I have that right. And it's a great group. And if you check out their website, you can learn more and find out how to get involved in that effort to stop, further destruction of First Nations territory and communities, and all the associated impacts of the mercury poisoning and destruction of the fisheries up there. Some of the last Atlantic salmon fisheries that we have. So it's an ecological crisis and a humanitarian crisis up in Labrador and in Quebec right now, as Judy's speaking to. But I definitely encourage people who are interested in that to check that out.
Right, and the flooding of all this land has released mercury. And so when the mercury gets into the water, it's not drinkable, and the fish are no longer edible. And so these communities who have been relocated, now they were subsistence people. They hunted and they fished, right? Now they pay $17 for a liter bottle of drinking water. So the only way I can see that we can help is to reduce what we're asking for down here, and make sure our children understand what a need is and what a want is. We need clean air, we need clean water, we need shelter, and we need food. We don't need 15 states in the Midwest growing corn for beef and ethanol. We don't need that. And that's what they're trying to do to the farms here. They want to close the farms here so that the big farms can get bigger. And we have learned that things are not sustainable when they're too big. It doesn't matter what they are. The bigger they get, the less sustainable they are.
Judy, there's somebody with a hand up. I want to make sure we get to this question. Earl, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself if you haven't already and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, on the dams, what I don't hear mentioned also is the methane that they release when they're creating electricity and releasing water through their gates. Also releasing methane constantly from the lakes as the biomass is decaying in the below the water in the lakes from the flooding that can go on for 60 to 80 plus years after a lake has been created by a hydro dam. That organization that you mentioned, also another organization that I work with, the Waterkeeper Alliance, they're working together in Congress to get a bill that would require hydro dams to report the amount of methane that the dams and the lakes are releasing, so that the public will know how much methane is being released. Internationally, the UN has reported that 16% of methane released internationally is being released by hydro dams. I've got 2 of them in Oklahoma, where I moved here from, in my watershed down there that are wreaking havoc in that area, and we're working to try to deal with that. But on the other hand, I also am co-chair for an international organization called the Western Mining Action Network. And what I don't hear since I moved here to Vermont are folks talking about the fact that solar and wind energy are not sustainable nor renewable because of their dependency upon mining. And this organization that I co-chair, the Western Mining Action Network, is a network of over 400 organizations, half of which are indigenous, and I chair our indigenous caucus. And we're developing a campaign for the right to say no, which we're bringing to Congress. We don't want any more mining on indigenous lands. And also, we're trying to impress upon government not only that we have the right to say no in our communities, also on our national parks, our national forests, BLM lands. Our sacred sites are all located on these lands, and we're tired of mining happening on our lands where 80% of the world gets the energy from our lands and we get very little of it back. And so Judy's talking about conservation and doing, using less energy, and I really appreciate that. That's the point. The rich are using up this energy with wall abandoned, while the indigenous people were all the rare earth minerals and lithium for batteries and cobalt and nickel are being mined. They're using that energy up and we're not benefiting from it. So what we're developing a campaign to the government for recycling, reuse, remanufacturing of all these products that carry these rare earths, and recycling the batteries, reusing these products, along with conservation, mass transit. We're working with groups like ours around the world that have put a pencil to all of this that I'm saying, and we're finding that if governments put their money that they're putting into mining into what I've just said, recycling, reuse, remanufacturing, substituting these rare earths with other minerals, with conservation and mass transit, we've found that we don't need new mines if they really take this seriously. And if governments and corporations would take serious what I'm saying, we can eliminate the need for new mines, and we could remake solar and wind so that it could be sustainable and renewable. But we see just the opposite direction from our governments, especially with what I'm reading the last 2 days. The Biden administration is going all out with industry for more mining to get these rare earths, to get the lithium. And we don't see much talk about conservation or recycling or remanufacturing at all.
Right. And, there's most of the reservations, they only own the top 6 inches. That's how the government gets the right to go into these reservations and mine, because they own everything below the top 6 inches of dirt. And
In some states they do, yes.
yeah, and they're also trying to buy the air over the reservations now too, and claim ownership of the air so they can stop airwaves from traveling back and forth. Thank you for sharing that, because mining can be severely devastating to the land. But I'm not saying that there isn't any mining going here. That I believe the mining going on here is in our forests. Industrial agriculture is not just these massive places in the Midwest where they grow corn. Industrial agriculture is also happening in forestry. And that's where a lot of our land is going. We're providing, a lot of our trees are going. There's one of the things we've been questioning on the committee, and Cheryl Joy's been quite vocal about this, is that if a tree falls down in the forest, the formula they currently use, they consider it still a forest. If they come in and selectively cut the forest up and cut down this tree and that one and every other tree, it's still considered a forest on the formula they use. If they come in and clear cut everything in that forest, it's still considered a forest. And in my mind, that's mining. That's putting economy first, because it's taking away the opportunity to store carbon, which is what we need.
Judy, that leads really nicely into the next question, perfectly, actually. So the next one is, I'm curious about your thoughts on the clean heat standard legislation currently making its way through legislature. In particular, I agree that woody biomass for electricity generation is a bad idea, but what about for household thermal heating? Well, it sort of leads into that, but it is talking about the forests and how we use them as cropland. It's not really a forest, but trees as
Right.
crop.
Exactly. So I have some serious problems with biomass. I have some serious problems with the processes they're using to determine that they're net zero. I live in Essex. Every day between 20 and 35 train cars of wood chips come through Essex at the Five Corners. And I followed them many times to the Intervale. And I know it takes a logger with fossil fuels to cut those trees down. They're not out there with the old saws you push and pull and push and pull. They're using chainsaws. I know skidders are pulling those logs out of the woods using fossil fuels. I know they're going to a chipper using fossil fuels, and they're being driven to the train cars using diesel, right? Fossil fuels. And then they get to the McNeil or Reigate or whatever, and they get dumped, and bucket loaders move them around, and bucket loaders load them into the hoppers to burn. And I also know, while this is all going on, truck after truck is delivering logs that have to be chipped and cut. And I also know there's no way all those fossil fuels could be used and still be net zero. There's just no way that can happen. I have a lot of people who have been helping me get the data I need because the state holds it very close to their chest. And I know that small places like schools that are using biomass to heat their schools, that the air pollutants coming out from their chimneys are low. But I also know the pollutants coming out of places like McNeil and Rygate and any lumber place making furniture or lumber is exceptionally high. And so I look at these things and think, okay, I don't want to go back to the days where we all have to cut our wood and have our heat just from our own little wood stove any more than you want to go back to those days. But there's got to be ways to find balance. And if we can do these small wood things in a school and have it be offset by these massive generating plants that are causing more harm, I mean, we're looking at our largest polluters of our air in this state with these two large scale places. And so it's like I said earlier, if we can get rid of some of these large scale things that we know are harmful, then we can work our way towards balance. Does that answer your question? Yeah. I saw one too. Somebody asked me to explain that 85% ratio thing. So 80% of the world's plant diversity is in the hands of 5% of indigenous people in the world. That comes from the UN.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. We have a question from Annette, and it is that efforts to reduce emissions increasingly seem to rely on telling people what to buy and dictating things about lifestyle. I can see this headed towards what China has as a social credit system. How can we do it differently? And she also says that she brought up recycling reducing consumption to cross-sector mitigation. That is one of the other subcommittees. And it like a lead balloon.
Yeah, I can imagine. Annette, you always got good questions. All right, let's think about this. Efforts to reduce emissions seem to rely on telling people what to buy. Yeah, man, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have commercials? And I think of all those parents out there with kids that have seen commercials and they say, I want. You know, if we don't control I want, we're not gonna go anywhere. So the efforts to reduce have to control lifestyles. My husband's an electrician. We're getting older and he loves not having to walk to the telephone. So we have a telephone in 6 of our rooms. Do we need a telephone in 6 of our rooms? No, we don't. We can get up and walk, but I mean, there's an electrician right here living here, right? But worse yet, what if it was TVs? What if we had TVs in every room? Think of the power that's going to use. So we have to start educating our children. I was asked to write a paper for a magazine on climate change and hope, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't write it about hope. And so I told them I couldn't do it. And they're like, well, think on it for a while. And so I called my granddaughter, my 10-year-old granddaughter, and I said to her, Juniper, let me read a couple sentences to you and tell me what you think about this. And so I would read some really negative thing that I knew about climate change, right? And she'd come back with, but Meme, if you just did this, if you just did that, it would work out. So I end up putting all of her hopeful thoughts into this paper, and we are publishing it together. But I guess if I was to say where my hope would be, it would be in these kids. And so if we want hope in those kids, we have to teach them. We're the adults. We have to let them know that they have to reduce. You know, we have to know that certain lifestyles are frivolous and harming the world. And some lifestyles are sustainable. And here's the difference. If we don't teach them, they can't be our hope.
Here's another question for you, Judy. Judy, you talked about giving more voice to people who have less than average equity. Would you comment on how to bring people with more than average influence to the average and equitable influence?
Oh my God, duct tape? I don't know. I mean, because there's a lot of privileged people on these committees, and they have very strong voices. And we all know the one who screams the loudest is the one who gets heard. We know that. And so I came up with some rules that I presented to follow for the rules of the biomass committee. So we didn't have a lot of screamers. And because what happens for me is I hear them screaming and I think I have to scream louder. And so I do. And so we agreed on those rules, and we've been following those rules. And so the second meeting went a lot better. But I think it all comes down to balance, and balance in time, balance not allowing people to suck the air out of the room with their opinions, and respect for each other. And we have responsibility. We have a big responsibility. If we can't respect the people in this meeting, what's going to happen? Nothing will get accomplished.
The next one is, you made a general statement about too big equals unsustainable. What about the energy efficiency of cities? Do you feel that we need to reduce population generally?
Well, I think we are naturally, that's happening because people can't afford large families, right? My mother came from a family of 16 and my father came from a family of 12. We don't see that anymore. I came from a family of 5, and I had 2 children. And so I think that's naturally happening because people simply cannot afford it. I don't want to say to do away with or to limit how many children somebody should have. I don't want to say that at all. But I think, again, reason and balance is what's needed here, and people can make up their own decision. So big cities, how do I feel about big cities? I avoid them when I can, but I think there's lots that can be done in a big city to make it better and more sustainable. Going up seems to help with the land use and having these higher apartments. But then there's so many other things that seems to help in cities, like they have more transportation, public transportation with subways and buses and what do they call Ubers? And we're so rural here, we don't have those things. So I think they're working to make themselves sustainable. And they're also in bigger cities. When I've gone to them, I've noticed they're making little sub-communities within the city. And these sub-communities work to better their community, which betters the whole. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm not very familiar with big cities because I try to avoid them.
If I may, Judy, I want to jump in with a question here that is something that I think I most admired you for bringing up during the climate action plan process. And it really kind of, to me, cut to the core of some of the issues that you were up against, that we are up against as the Standing Trees community. And I think it, again, took a lot of courage on your part to kind of wage the battle that you did over this idea of what to do about all of that quote unquote low grade wood
Well,
out on the land here in New England. And this is, you know, if for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with the term low grade wood, this is a term from forestry that refers to, you know, wood that doesn't have an easy end product. When you're thinking about how to turn our forests into wood products, the low grade wood is the wood that you're not really sure what to do with. You're trying, you know, this is the wood you're trying to make economic use of, but are you know, struggling to do so. And it's the wood that is talked about most often when you're, you know, talking about biomass electricity and you know, other kinds of uses of imperfect, you know, like all of us, imperfect trees and material from a forest. And I just, you know, find this personally to be a deeply offensive way of talking about our forests. And it meant a great deal to me, Judy, when you started, you know, the conversation at the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee about what is, you know, what's the deeper meaning here, and what is this saying about our culture and how we view forests and how we value life. And I wanted to just give you the opportunity, if you would, just to speak about this a little bit, because I really think that this was a really poignant moment during the climate action plan process when the committee dove into this, and it was because of you asking really important questions and educating the folks involved. So just curious if you'd speak to that.
sure, thank you. So when I was in 10th grade, which was a hell of a long time ago, I was given a textbook to read, and it said, We Americans, the Cleavage of an American City. And it was all about Burlington. And it was written by Ellen Anderson, who was the assistant director of the Vermont eugenics program. And at that time, I'm like asking a million questions. I don't understand what this eugenics is. I'm reading this book and I see my family in there. I see where we live in there. And I asked my father and mother, they're like, yeah, no, we heard about something like that, but we don't remember it. We don't know what it was. And so I started asking questions in class, and the teacher said, oh, my dear, this is a textbook. You must believe what you read. Well, that was the beginning of a journey for me. And I spent the last, I don't know, 35 years trying to figure out what the eugenics program was and how my family was the largest family targeted in the records, 623 people. And so what I did in the process of learning this, and for those that you don't know, the Vermont Eugenics Project was a project in which they subjectively identified people with what they called the 3 Ds, defective, dependent, and delinquent. And they institutionalized many and they sterilized many. And it was quite problematic and lots of historical trauma there. Well, around this same time, conservationists were coming into power, or sometimes they're called environmentalists. And like Teddy Roosevelt, he worked on getting all these national parks and stuff like that. And so, so what happened when they came into play? They started using terms that eugenicists use. The trees are low grade, this land is low grade, so we need to do something about it. We need to do this, we need to do that. And so what I began to find out, to see from the foresters on our committee and those who understood how forestry worked, was they were using the same language of the eugenicists from the 30s. And I'm like, where did that come from? Why are you calling trees low grade or defective? And they're like, they are. And I said, what do you mean low grade? And they're like, well, it could be in a wetland. I'm like, that's not low grade, that's high grade, because that makes good ash for a basket. And so my whole beliefs on how to look at the trees was totally the opposite of what they were doing. And so we began to talk about the language of the agencies in our state and the foresters. And the language that they're using is all coming from that same time frame of the eugenics period. And so that's where a lot of the logs are that are coming, that they're using, where they're located, or if they have one tree fell down and swiped it and it has an injury, but it's still sequestering and storing carbon, they think it's defective. So they'll cut down an 80-year-old tree, a 100-year-old tree, and replace it with a 6-inch white pine because it's defective. And so we started talking about that. And one of our recommendations, I don't know if anything will happen with it, but one of the recommendation was to make people aware in the agencies of the language that they're using and how problematic it is, and work to change it. And maybe if they change the language and they don't look at trees as defective or low grade, but a tree is a tree that's saving us, they might not be so quick to cut them down. So that was the gist of that conversation.
Thank you, Judy.
Mm-hmm.
This is a question for you that I know you're going to love, actually. Bill McKibben, who promoted the burning of biomass wherever he spoke, which resulted in colleges such as Middlebury, Goddard, and many others acting on his advice, installing biomass heating systems, now is actively attacking promoters of biomass for heating and energy production. And now he says that he supports nuclear fueled power generation. What are your thoughts on nuclear power? What do we do with the highly toxic nuclear waste generated by these power plants if he gets his way? Is this a solution to the climate crisis?
Well, sometimes some of us fall on our head, get a bump on our head, and we have an awakening. Sometimes some of us just don't know what the hell's going on, you know, and I have seen Bill McKibben change his mind in a lot of directions on a lot of things. And that's okay. We all have the right to change our mind, but he's a very public person. So he needs to clarify where he's coming from and make it understood what he means exactly before he changes his mind again. So how do I feel about nuclear? Right now, I'm glued to the TV thinking about nuclear power plants in Ukraine. I'm glued to the TV thinking about chemical warfare and nuclear bombs being dropped. I am not too excited about nuclear until we figure out how to control it, recycle it, and reuse it. Because we haven't even figured out how to recycle the toxic chemicals in a solar panel, the toxic materials. Mm-hmm. And so if we can't figure out that, how are we going to figure out how to recycle nuclear waste? Now, you're not listening to a scientist. You're listening to a K-1-2 teacher. I taught K-1 too. And a lot of this stuff is common sense. And to me, you don't play with fire unless you know how to put it out. And that's common sense. And that's the way I feel about nuclear. Maybe it'll work, I don't know. But until we figure out how to recycle it and take care of it on the other end, I would stay away from it.
The next question we have here actually is bringing something up that I wanted to, that has something to do with what you talked about with the trees that were, well, let me just read the question for you and then add something to it. She asks, can we restore diversity without the use of GMOs? Are there any groups doing this? And I'm not certain, but I have a feeling that she might be thinking about the genetically modified or ultra hybridized chestnut trees and American chestnut and elm trees, and perhaps also I think they might, I don't know if they're going to be working on the ash, but this also brings up something that I wanted to say about the injured trees that you talked about that are not low grade but just have an injury, and those are not only carbon storing, but they're also feeding insects and giving homes to, you know, creatures and things like that. So that was the question. Restore diversity without GMOs.
Yeah, there is no diversity in GMOs. There is none. The seeds produce males. And if they cross-pollinate with something in nature, then it makes that a male. So, but think about this land 14,000 years ago with 2 miles of ice on it. And it starts to melt and it scrapes backwards and it takes all the topsoil with it, takes all the seeds with it, it takes everything. And then slowly lichen begins to grow, it dies, moss begins to grow, vegetation starts to come and trees come. And this whole land is created by things that just happened upon this land that was bare, right? And so if we can do it then, we can do it now. The problem is it takes a long time. And I know I said this at one of the meetings, you know, if people don't want to buy into reducing or, you know, some of these other things, it's okay. Mother Earth will be fine. We just won't be here to see it. And so you have to come to that realization. And I think the chestnuts and the elm trees, I think people are working on that now to make them disease free. I think that's happening now. So Annie, I'm still reading. Annie is asking about the 5% and 80%. Annie, can you come on and talk to me about that so I can figure that out, what you're asking?
I'm unmuting. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm not sure where I am, or I would put my camera on.
That's
It
okay.
just occurred to me, it sounded a little confusing to say that 80% of the biodiverse land is managed by 5% of indigenous people. And I'm wondering if what you're really trying to get at is that 5% or 80% of the, I don't know where I am.
I'm not talking about the land. I'm talking about 5% of the indigenous people in this world have in their hands that they're managing 80% of the biodiversity. So think about the
Yes.
Amazon and the few people who live in the Amazon.
exactly. I think that's what you were getting at, but the way it came across to me anyway was that, and I knew you didn't mean it as sounding like only 5% of the people who were doing the managing were indigenous.
Oh yeah, I do mean that.
Do you?
Yeah, 5% of the people, indigenous people control 80% of the biodiversity.
So are you saying then that 95% of indigenous people are not involved?
No,
Okay,
I'm
then,
saying that 20% of plants are in the hands of the rest of the population.
okay, that's what I thought you were saying, but I just wanted to clarify it because
Yep.
it sounded like you were saying that 5% of indigenous people managed 80% and that the other 95% of indigenous people weren't involved. And I didn't think that
No.
sounded right.
No, there's only, the world's population of indigenous people is only 5%.
That's what that's what I thought you were trying to
Okay.
get at. Thank you for clarifying it.
You're welcome. What's up next, Cheryl?
Well, and I think we're maybe winding down. Maybe just time for one more question. I hate to cut us off, but just out of respect for everybody's time this evening, including Judy's, we've promised to wrap up by 8:30. So maybe just one more question, Cheryl Joy, if that's okay.
Okay, and this one is just random through the middle, since I'm not in order right now. And this question is, if you have the time, and Judy, thank you for sharing all of your time and energy and thoughts and for all your work here. Is there somewhere where we can read the paper that's coming out from you and your daughter about your ideas for solutions? Or was that?
Yes, it's being published in May in, it's called Field Notes, and it's put out by the Rubenstein School at UVM. It's a magazine.
Wonderful. Field Notes.
Well, I just want to thank you again, Judy, for being with us tonight, for all of your leadership, and we are just, really open to, future suggestions from you about how Standing Trees can support you and your role in the climate action plan process and on this biomass task group. Yeah, just we're all here at your side as you go through these difficult conversations. And I know it probably doesn't always feel that way in the room with the committees, unfortunately stacked, honestly, the way that it is. But we are all there with you. And I hope that as many of us as can will join in for these conversations. They're open to the public, the biomass task group conversations, as well as the ag and ecosystem meetings. You can be there by Judy's side, and there is always a public comment opportunity. And so encourage anyone who has the ability to tune in. But thank you so much for being a part of this tonight, for being a part of the Standing Trees community. We hope you'll stay in touch and take action when opportunities come up soon. And again, please join us this spring, this summer, when we can get outside together and be in the woods again. So thank you and have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you. It is nice to have you all at those meetings. You do definitely motivate and support me. I appreciate it. Thank you.